So this video is to give you guys a brief introduction to Ionic and what Ionic is. At its most basic, Ionic can be used as just some CSS. Build your HTML, use the appropriate class names, and the CSS gets applied, and you've got something that looks like a mobile web app. That's a very limited approach to using it, but it's something that you can do with it. Now, what it's intended to be is a wrapper around Cordova for building hybrid applications, as well as a wrapper around Angular. So it leverages the functionality that you get from the AngularJS. It uses its own CSS on top of that. It has its own directives or components built for AngularJS, and it also uses the functionality provided by Cordova for building hybrid applications. So if we're going to use Ionic on our computer, we need to make sure that we've got two things installed. So we use npm install and Ionic globally. That's the first one. I already have it, so I'm not going to do it again here. But we do need to install Ionic. And the second thing that we need to be sure is that we have Cordova installed globally. So with those two pieces, we can start to build Ionic applications. Once those are installed, with Node, you can run the Cordova command from the command line. So let's see, Cordova, and if I spell it correctly, it helps. There we go, Cordova version, tells me I've got version 4.3 of Cordova, and Ionic, if I want to find out the version that I've got installed, I'm just checking to see if it's installed. There we go. So I've got Ionic installed, I've got Cordova installed. It's giving me a warning that I don't have iOS deploy installed, which I would need if I was going to run the simulator and build iOS hybrid applications with this. This video, we're not going to get into that. Alright, so I want to build an Ionic project and see what I get with that project. Just right out of the gate, what do I get? So Ionic is now the command that I can use. Because I installed it globally, I can use it from anywhere. Start is the command to create the project. It's like the Cordova create command. Ionic start is really it's a wrapper around that. It does all the same things that Ionic create does, except it brings in the Ionic and Angular files too. So Ionic start, the name of my project will be Baba. There we go, that's a recognizable name in my folder structure. And the fourth optional parameter is what kind of template do you want to use. So there's blank, there's tabs, there's side menu. There's several of these templates that they've got built. I'm going to use the tabs for today and just hit enter. So it's creating the Ionic app, downloading the files that it needs, it expands all those files, and you can see right here, initializing Cordova project. So it is adding the Cordova project in there. And because I'm on OS X, it added the iOS stuff in there for me by default. Do I want to create an Ionic account? Not at the moment. I have an Ionic account, but I'm not going to use it for this app. Okay, done. So now let's take a look at this folder. And, oh, sorry, it's already there. There we go, right at the top. Baba. This is my folder. So inside there, there's a bunch of config files, my bower.json file talking about dependencies that Bower needs to run this, gulp, another JavaScript library tool that helps us, hooks, package.json, this is what npm uses to build our project, talks about the different things that I need. You can see Sass. You guys know about Sass. That's something that this will be using for us. Here's the folder. There's the Ionic app CSS file, or SCSS file. And down at the very bottom, from our work with Cordova, we know the www folder is where all the magic happens. This is really where we're going to be doing most of our work is inside here. So we'll open up the index.html file, the Ionic bundle.js. This really is key. You can see in the comment here, Ionic Angular. So this is the Angular file with the Ionic JavaScript tied right in. So we've got those things combined into one single JavaScript file for us already. Cordova.js, we need that for doing our hybrid app. And then app.js, controllers, and services. So inside the JS folder, we can see that we've got those. There's app, and it starts us off with Ionic, starter controllers, starter services. So these are the ones that we need to get going with Ionic. They've got a run, they've got a config method. Notice state provider, URL provider. Remember Angular UI router? Ionic uses this by default. So understanding the difference between using ng router and Angular UI router, very important. Remember that we are using Angular UI router within Ionic. So we've got our named states. So tab is a main state, and then dash and chats, chat detail, those are sub states within tab. So this page will be loading tabs.html, and then there'll be another view that's loading these things on the page at the same time. And there's our otherwise tab dash. That's the one that's going to show up. This one right here. Our controllers, there we are. They've got one page with all of our controllers. Dash controller, chats controller, chat detail controller, account controller, and this one right here, starter controllers. Now if I go back, there we go. You'll notice starter. This is the name of our main application. Here we have the square brackets where we're bringing in everything that this needs. However, starter.controllers is another module in itself. So back over in here, module starter controllers. This is another module, and that's why it's got another set of square brackets. If this were the same name as the module inside app.js, this would actually be overwriting our original module, and we'd lose all the injected dependencies. So very important to pay attention to these names. Sometimes when you get into libraries like Ionic and other libraries like that, they will be doing things where there's a subtle change to the name, and things like this take on importance. So there's nothing additionally being injected. This one is being loaded into app.js. And then in services, there's another one, bring in a blank. Okay. All right, so now we want to test and see what this thing has actually given us. Just out of the box, we've done the install from the command line, and I'm going to go to our terminal window here. You can see I've jumped into the directory Bubba. I've listed the contents of that. There we are. We're inside this project, and Ionic serve is what we're going to do. Okay, multiple available. Which one do we want to do? I'm going to do number 2. There we go. Yes, allow that to happen. And there we go. This is our application. We've got the tabs at the bottom. That's what was provided to us right out of the box. So all this stuff is in there for us to take a look at. And that's all that it took, was just those few commands on the command line to create the project and run it, so that we can update things in the HTML and the CSS and go back and forth and take a look at the live reload happening inside that server. So we want to shut down our server so that we can look at some other things. Q is the command that we would use to shut down the server. So Ionic serve to start, Q to stop, and then what we're going to do is look at some other commands. We could add Android to the project. If I had the Android SDK installed, I would be able to do this. There we go. So it goes off and fetches that. We can build a project. So Ionic build Android or Ionic build iOS. If you want to launch it in the emulator, you could say Ionic emulate Android. Now, I don't believe I've got any emulators set up on here, so this is probably going to fail on me. Yeah, but so we can build, emulate, run, platform add. We can add plugins. It's all the same sort of things that we did with Cordova. It's just that we're doing it with the Ionic wrapper. So we're using the Ionic commands instead of Cordova commands to do this. Okay, and that's a basic introduction to Ionic.